every type of American steak explained. There are 10 types of steak eaten across America. We explain every single one. Ribeye. The ribeye is what most steak lovers consider the greatest cut on the entire animal. It comes from the rib section and contains extraordinary amounts of intramuscular fat called marbling, which melts during cooking and bastes the meat from the inside. That's what creates the rich, buttery flavor that no leaner cut can replicate. But a surprising fact, the ribeye comes from a muscle that does almost no work during the cow's life. And the less a muscle works, the more tender and fatty it stays. New York strip. The New York strip comes from the short loin and has less marbling than a ribeye, but a firmer, denser texture that many steak lovers actually prefer. The chew is more satisfying and the flavor is cleaner. It almost always has a thick strip of fat along one edge that renders during cooking and adds flavor without overwhelming the meat. The detail most people miss, the New York strip and the larger side of a T-bone steak are literally the same cut, just one still has the bone. Filet mignon. Filet mignon is the most tender steak that exists, cut from the tenderloin, a muscle that runs along the spine and never bears any weight or performs any significant movement. That complete lack of activity means virtually no connective tissue develops, resulting in a texture so soft it can be cut with a butter knife. The trade-off is flavor. Less fat means less rich compared to a ribeye. Surprising fact, an entire cow produces only 8 to 10 filet mignon steaks, making it one of the rarest cuts on the animal. T-bone. T-bone is essentially 2 steaks in one, a New York strip on the larger side and a filet mignon on the smaller side, separated by a T-shaped bone. The challenge of cooking it perfectly is that both muscles cook at different rates, requiring real skill to nail simultaneously. A detail worth knowing, federal regulations actually define the difference between a T-bone and a porterhouse. T-bone must have a fillet section of at least ½ an inch, while a porterhouse requires 1¼ inches or more. Flank steak. Flank steak comes from the abdominal muscle, one of the hardest working areas on the entire cow, giving it an intensely beefy, robust flavor that fattier cuts simply can't match. The key to eating it is always slicing against the grain after cooking, which shortens the muscle fibers and transforms a tough cut into something surprisingly tender. The surprising fact, flank steak was considered a throwaway cut for most of American culinary history. Butchers sold it cheap or ground it into hamburger. Its rise to restaurant staple happened almost entirely within the last 30 years. And trust me, you don't want to miss number 9. It's the most underrated steak on this list, and it costs a fraction of what most people pay for ribeye. Skirt steak. Skirt steak, a cut that built Tex-Mex cuisine. It is the original fajita meat used by Mexican ranch workers along the Texas border for generations before fajitas ever appeared on a restaurant menu. It comes from the diaphragm muscle, which works constantly, giving it an even more intense flavor than flank steak, with a looser grain that absorbs marinades beautifully. The detail most people don't know, the more prized outside skirt steak rarely makes supermarket shelves. Restaurants and butchers buy it first every single time. Hanger steak. Hanger steak literally hangs from the diaphragm of the cow, which is exactly how it got its name. French bistro chefs called it butcher steak for decades because butchers kept it for themselves rather than selling it, knowing it delivered extraordinary flavor at almost no cost. It has a deep, tense, slightly mineral beefy flavor and a tender texture, responds beautifully to high heat and acid marinades. The remarkable detail, there is only one hanger steak per cow, making it permanently limited in supply no matter how high demand grows. Flat iron steak. The flat iron steak was literally invented in 2002 by university researchers tasked with finding value in underused parts of cow. They discovered a muscle in the shoulder blade that was second only to the tenderloin in tenderness, but had always been discarded because of a line of connective tissue running through it. By removing that tissue, they created a cut delivering near filet tenderness at half the price. Surprising fact, flat iron is now the second most popular steak in American restaurants by volume. A cut that didn't exist before 2002 became a mainstream staple within a single decade. Chuck eye steak. Chuck eye is the best kept secret in American butchery, sitting immediately next to the ribeye on the rib section, sharing the same muscle, same marbling, and nearly identical flavor at roughly half the price. Butchers have quietly called it the poor man's ribeye for decades. The catch, there are only 2 chuck eye steaks per cow, so supply is extremely limited, and most stores sell out fast. The detail worth knowing, if you want one, ask your butcher directly. They rarely make it to the display case before disappearing. Wagyu. Wagyu is not a cut, it's a breed of Japanese cattle selectively bred for centuries to develop extreme intramuscular fat marbling, unlike anything seen in conventional beef. American Wagyu crosses Japanese genetic with black Angus, producing beef that sits between standard American steak and full Japanese A5 Wagyu, enriched. The fat melts below body temperature, meaning it begins dissolving on your tongue before you even chew. The remarkable detail, authentic Japanese A5 Wagyu is so rich that portions are delivered deliberately kept 3 or 4 ounces. A full American-sized portion would be genuinely overwhelming to eat. And that's every type of American steak explained. Which one surprised you the most? Drop it in the comments. We read every single one. If you learned something new today, make sure you subscribe. We drop a new video every week.